Hey, it's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I am a comic book artist, writer, creator, self publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, I'd like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI and sign up. In addition to the bonus live streams, you'll get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share art talk, tips, feedback, works in progress, criticism and feedback. And you also get access to an online archive where you can read my comic books digitally. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll take you to my Amazon author page where you can pick up physical copies of my books. All right. So, and also, speaking of Patreon exclusive live streams, this Monday, tomorrow, we will be having a Patreon exclusive live stream at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we'll be doing what we call Art Book Study Group. It's a session where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around, try to suck out all the knowledge we can. If you sign up, you will get access to all of the previous ones. There's an online archive of hundreds of hours of study. We're analyzing, books by George Bridgman, Ken Holtgren. We've been doing a long-running series on Walt Reads the Figure. All those videos are up there for you guys to check out. And if you miss tomorrow's session, you can always watch the replay. That will be available for anyone else as well. So with that, let's get into today's drawing session. So I am continuing with character designs from or for my upcoming comic. And I was sitting here thinking about the fact that I still want to kind of work from silhouette and work kind of generally, but I'm thinking about slightly shifting gears. Instead of trying to design specifically one character at a time, that maybe I should create a new page and just have silhouettes of all of these characters to work from. So the creatures that are being fought in this series are representations of different ideas. So there's, let me put this, pass it all the way up. There's sickness. Let's just call it disease. It's kind of like the Four Horsemen. Let's see. Disease. Stillbirth, which is not one of the Four Horsemen, but it's a problem in the story I'm doing. Famine, rage, death, chaos, and of course I'm going to have I don't have to have a kaiju in there, but I do have a monster in there. So there's a Greek monster called Typhon who plays a role, even though he's not one of the spirits that's directly related to the other ones in the series. He's an important creature. So what I'm thinking is just trying to by designing the characters one by one, I run into the possibility or the problem that I might kind of just reuse the same body template. Whereas if I'm drawing them as a group, I can kind of like add a little bit to one, a little bit to another, say, oh, wait, this one's too tall, this one's too short, make this one more monstrous. I've got two characters that are skinny. How can I make them stand out more? Or, how can I differentiate them? So that is kind of the idea here, is just starting with these guys and trying to do a couple of quick silhouette sketches. And I'm actually wondering how big I should make this first. I don't know why, but I feel like I want to have a little frame around this thumbnail. Just to kind of frame the whole thing. I think because this process, my buddy Carl Altstetter constantly tells me that the big problem I have is that I'm constantly reinventing the wheel. Instead of just coming up with one method and then working that method, that process to develop characters or to write or to do thumbnails, I'm constantly saying, oh, but what if I try this? What if I try that? Part of that is that I still feel like I'm optimizing and I'm still learning my own process, even at this late age. I'm always tweaking and trying different things. And in that tweaking, it just makes sense to me, instead of saying, okay, I've got, if I don't feel like the way that I'm doing things is the 100%, this is my process, this is what works well for me, then I try to be open to just looking at things and saying, let me look at a different approach here. Let me experiment with this. Let's see here. So these are going to be silhouettes, but I have found, and I think I've shown you guys this in my thumbnailing process, that even with silhouettes, I like drawing stick figures and then kind of filling them out. And I know that this is pretty small, especially if you're watching on a phone or something. But when I'm starting out, it is also important to me to draw small, so I'm prevented from putting a lot of detail into whatever I'm drawing. I don't want a lot of detail at this stage. Because having a lot of detail will just encourage me to noodle instead of staying focused on sort of the big picture of what's going on, trying to work out the large details. And I see Chris in the chat. Hey, how you doing? Thanks for dropping by. Hope you are having a good Sunday, doing something fun, doing something creative. It's funny. I started with this creature, which for disease, I decided to make it a giant rat. But even with that, I'm looking at this, and my idea of wanting to design all the characters together, this feels like this is taking up way too much room if I'm going to put like 7 creatures in here, and one of them is a giant kaiju. In fact, I am going to take this rat creature here, and I'm going to shrink it down to the point where you might be like, first off, it's going to be tiny for you guys. You're like, how small is he going to draw? Again, thumbnailing, you want to have small pictures. You don't want to have a lot of stuff that takes up space, and you don't want to give yourself room to noodle. I would much rather do a tiny little thumbnail like this that really is just barely a smudge that I can understand, and then blow it up and have to work out the details once I've got the broad shapes. But the reason why I switched this is because I think I'm going to try and design it with the largest creature, the Typhon, first. And I'm going to actually design this as if I am doing a group shot. In fact, I need to go back out to my gallery and take a look, because I know I've done some sketches and designs of this monster, and I can't remember if I came up with anything that I actually liked so far. Oh yeah, flaming head, wings, kind of a melted face, kind of like a Gila monster with like lava tears. Tiny little snake hands. All right, I can work with that. Excuse me. It's one of the downsides of working on a project over a long period of time when you're still doing kind of your early rough development, is that you do things like what I just did there, where I've already done some of the design work for a character, and I really can't even remember what I designed, what I liked about it or didn't like it. Did I get anything down that's worth pursuing or including? So to a certain degree, it almost does feel like I'm starting from scratch. I mean, obviously I'm not, because I had something that I could very quickly look at and say, oh, wait, no, I've developed something here that is immediately usable. Let's see here. Hey, I see James in the chat. How you doing? Good to see you. He says, looks like some macabre stuff. The previous page you were on. Yes, yeah. That page is a monster a monster from Greek mythology called Typhon. And all of the descriptions that I have read in my research, just he's like this horrible monster. Like he is their sort of Leviathan type monstrous apocalyptic kaiju. And I mean, I've read some where he's got like a head made of or he's got hair of like 100 snakes, kind of like a little bit like a Gorgon, like Medusa. But just he's this horrific, nightmarish creature. And to be honest, right now, I am making him a little bit too human. I actually need to make him look more like a creature. That's another thing. This is interesting. As I'm going through this, I am trying to push away from humanoid figures and trying to look at animals for more of the designs for the villains of the story. And yeah, James says, yes. Is it worth pursuing? I can relate. Sometimes I'll exaggerate shapes and really push and combine forms. Yeah, I mean, that's the design process is strange in that even if you have an idea of what you want, a lot of the process really is just pushing and poking around and trying to discover interesting things, seeing if there's something that you hadn't necessarily thought of before. You know what? I want to go back to that image I was looking at. And pull up some of these earlier pages. Now, I was just saying that I wanted him to be less humanoid, but this image that I have here really does feel like how I kind of want this creature to feel. So I guess what I want to see is if I can kind of tweak his torso a little bit to make him less humanoid. And if so, you know, what is the best way to do that? Maybe it's a matter of putting him on all fours. I've got like eels as reference and other weird sea creatures. I think that's what I kind of want to do with his face, is kind of give him sort of a moray eel face. Let me lasso this sketch, which presumably I was pretty happy with this as a design. I can tell it just looks like something that I would have drawn and be like, oh yeah, that works. I'm going to copy and then go back to the other document, paste that in here. Let's move this down here so I can kind of look at that while I'm moving things around. Let's see here. And James says tentacles for legs. That's interesting. Well, see, this is the crazy thing about research. I would never have thought of giving a creature tentacles for legs. That is part of the creature's description in some of the Greek mythology that I looked up, which personally, at first, I was like, how am I going to make this work? That is so weird and wonky. Like, I would never have chosen to do that. So, yes, it's a cool idea, but it is a cool idea that Greek mythology gave me. I didn't come up with it. So I am not going to be afraid of erasing something just because sometimes when you get something on the page that works, you're like, oh well, I don't want to lose that, or I don't want to redo it. Normally, I like to draw multiple versions of a figure before I actually, you know what? It's not that I'm afraid of erasing this, but I think before I go into this composition here, this composition that I'm starting to draw with the rat and the big one up there, that's going to be me trying to work all the characters together. But if I'm going to play with this figure a little bit more, I think when I say this figure, I mean this small sketch that's down here, the one that I pasted into the file. I want to play with his posture a little bit, and I think it probably makes sense to maybe draw a few silhouettes down here before trying to work him into that big one. And this might be me falling into the exact trap that I was trying to avoid, the thing about noodling too much before I've got a large sense of each of the characters. But while I'm creating these sort of self-imposed rules, I'm trying to both have a process or an approach, but also not be so rigid in it that I can't let myself just wander. So it's like I'm trying to both let myself wander and restrict myself at the same time, which is a very strange mental dance. But it is the mental dance that I'm dancing. I mean, in a certain sense, for me personally, I'm not saying for other designers, but for me personally, designing is kind of like talking out of both sides of my mouth at the same time. Because I'm trying to be, like I said, I'm trying to be focused and not caught up in minor details. Yet you have to let your mind wander. In order to properly design, you have to just open yourself up to a certain level of chaos. And I guess what I am seeking is a way to keep that chaos productive. And now something that is, I think, difficult to do in a thumbnail because I don't have other creatures here next to it. But I want to convey a sense of scale with this character. And maybe what would help is to I don't know, put a building next to him. Because normally you'd be like, oh, let me put a creature, or not a creature. Like, normally when you want to create a sense, first off, this is so small and so abstract, you guys really can't see what I'm doing. This is a bit of a challenge for me because I realize in order for you guys to even understand this conversation, I have to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. But when I am thinking in thumbnails, I am thinking zoomed out where it's tiny and you really can't. I mean, I'm repeating conversations that I've had with you guys before about trying to make it so small that it's something that I can barely decipher myself. And I have not seen Godzilla -1 yet, but I am trying to think in terms of a kaiju-y type feel for this creature because it is a sea monster. Now, see, this is where frames come in handy because I can put a tiny frame around this. And what I can try to do is simply, I don't know, put something large like a building in a foreground. And then behind that, in the distance, put another building. And even trying to make this look like a large palace. In terms of the design is that of a large palace, even though it's something that's supposed to be small. And then behind those two things, that's where I put my creature. Because normally when you want to have scale, this was what I meant to say before, is let's say I'm drawing this blob here with tentacles coming out of the ground, and that's my monster, right? You might say, okay, I'm going to put a normal, that brush is too big. I'm going to put a human here. Maybe he's got a little bow, an arrow. Give him a cape. I don't know why. Just decided cape. Spread that stance a little bit more. See, these are the kind of details that I draw tiny so that I can't get myself to get caught up in. I'm like, the stick figure stance is off. So I don't know how well you can see that, but it's a little stick figure. At this point, it looks like pixel art. Little stick figure with a bow and arrow. So you've got this little stick figure fighting this big ass monster. That's how you create a sense of scale. To really go big, to go huge with the scale, is to treat the building the way I would treat the stick figure. So like the building becomes the little thing that's next to the creature. That's how you get like a big ass, like, oh my God, this thing is monstrous. And then also trying to angle this as though you're looking up at him. So I'm starting with a box. Immediately having that taper and narrow. And the point of this is just to give me volumes to work with. These tentacle legs there. Actually, I think it would probably work better if I give him more of thighs and then have the thighs turn to tentacles. Like I said, it's real easy to just start sketching and get caught up in details that aren't necessarily going to benefit you as a storyteller. Or at least details that you don't need to work out right now because they're going to change. Let's see here. James says sea monsters, especially when they're based on aquatic life, can be scary. Did you use sea life reference? As a matter of fact, I did. If we jump back to that other document that I was looking at. So this is a variety of reference, and not all of it is sea life, because I was intentionally just trying to look for creepy creatures. So I've got several types of eels in here, because eels were what I was really trying to base the creature on. But on top of eels, I grabbed some spiders, jellyfish, squid, a flying fish, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the wings, because I want this creature to have wings. And right now the wings are very dragon-like. I may stick with that because that feels more like a for this flying fish. They're almost like a butterfly. They're very beautiful, and these translucent. You could almost, even though the photo doesn't have an iridescent sheen to them, but the way you look at insect wings, how they have that rainbow type iridescent sheen, I could almost see it having something like that. So I may change the wing design. It's early going yet, so I don't know. And I think this creature here, I don't know if this is just some weird, it's some weird eel. I don't know what kind of eel, but I found an image that also has the circulatory system, and I can't remember why it was that I looked for that. Anyway, like I said, spiders, Portuguese man o' war, squid. So yeah, I definitely looked at sea creature reference for this in combination with some insects and other creepy things. You were thinking exactly what I was thinking, which was, yeah, sea creatures can be disturbing. Well, what I was saying before about not getting too caught up in details, even though this drawing right here is very incomplete, I kind of like it. So I think I am going to erase what I have up here like I started to do before. And for now, I'm going to use that silhouette that I have there and then just sort of build the other figures around it. Just take a duplicate, put that up here. I'm going to make him a little bit larger. Move him off to the right. And let's merge him with that little frame that I've got there. All right, I'm going to get rid of that building just because I'm going to need this space to put the other creatures. Let's see here. James says it's a good silhouette. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting, and maybe it's one of those things where I have a hard time taking a compliment. But in my mind, I look at it and I think it's not necessarily that it is a good drawing. It's more that it feels like what I want it to feel like: creepy, mysterious, and a little unsettling. And right now, in the concept stage, the silhouette stage, feel is far more important than draftsmanship. I've got an entire comic book series to worry about drawing these characters well. Right now, I just want to work on making something that feels like what I'm trying to capture in the story. And I probably am also going to come back to sea creatures again, in the sense that this monster right now, like I said, it's got dragon type wings, but it's going to be a sea monster. And much in the way that I showed you that little piece of reference of that flying fish, I might want to look and see if there's other sea creatures that have fins that either allow them to leap out of water and somewhat glide, or if they just have fins that kind of suggest wings. Because maybe that suggestion of wings will be something that will work well for a creature that can both, like, if I can design wings that look like they would actually make sense for a creature to both leap out of the water and attack, but then also be able to swim with them, as opposed to something that would hinder them. Something that can work as both wing and fin. And maybe there is something I can come up with. Maybe there's not. Maybe I change the designs to match kind of those butterfly type wings. I mean, originally when I started designing this creature, it was a lot more designed around a manta ray, like a stingray type creature. Let's see here. HJ Mars in the chat says, "Hey Jeremy, long time no see. School has been kicking my ass." Well, you know what? Hey, school can be tough, but I'm glad you're in there. You're hanging in there. You're learning, growing. Hopefully, you're learning things that you can use creatively. I mean, I will tell you, it is so strange that I didn't pay as much attention in history class as I probably should have as a kid. But believe it or not, like history, politics, even mathematics, there's so many things that I was not interested in when I was in high school that now I'm like, wow, I can really make an interesting story out of this. But I have to set aside time to go and read and do research in order to be able to craft these things or learn stuff about them. So think of everything that's in school as possible research for a comic, and it'll actually help, I think, get through some of the more boring things, or it may make you more interested in things than you were initially. Because I wish I had as much time now to just study the world and look at different things and ideas. You know what? This looks weird. I think I'm just going to have this wing go off the page. I initially wanted to not do that and make the wing more present, but I think instead, just have it go off the page. And yes, this is me very clearly deviating from what I said and noodling now, but I'm just going to draw like that much of it. And let's try to add another creature to the composition here. So mind you, this is a composition that's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 monsters in it. And this isn't even something that's going to be a cover for the comic. I mean, I may eventually rework this and make a poster or a cover image or a promotional image, but this is just me trying to work out the beats of, not the beats of the story, but working out the design of the villains. And I've just decided that chaos, I don't want to make Chaos too tall. But one of the creatures, Chaos, is going to be here, standing on the wing. Because Chaos is sort of the puppet master of the villains in this story. In fact, that body just looks weird. Head. Hand kind of up. Sort of a Freddie Mercury. We will rock your ass. What I'm thinking is that there's a physical body that's going to be representing Chaos. But I'm also going to put glowing eyes. Like basically, I'm going to put a storm cloud around them, kind of trying to imply the fact that there's this little body that's up there. But this little body is in control of, or is an aspect of this otherworldly power that's much bigger than them, than their physical form. And I need to reel this in a little bit because I don't want the clouds to fight with the flames of the Typhon's head. Let's see here. HJ asks, what story are you currently working on? Well, I am working on an interpretation of a Greek mythology, and it's me doing a retelling of the myth of Pandora's box, and I'm designing the villains from the series. And I'm not sure how long it's going to be before I'm showing this like the actual comic pages publicly, because I want to get the entire series. It's going to be a 6-issue series. And I want to get the whole thing written before I start. And the writing is very ambitious. I'm kind of trying to push the story and the character development to in ways that I have not done before. And so it's involved a lot of writing and rewriting. In fact, I mean, to be honest, I honestly felt for a long period of time like I had a bit of writer's block until I realized that the problem was not the story. The problem was not that the characters were bad, but that I hadn't developed their relationships and how they interact with each other, and why the characters are treating each other the way that they are. Really trying to flesh out the aspects of their conflict. These clouds kind of remind me of like Nightcrawler from the X-Men. This little bamf. You know what? I'm going to let these clouds come down a little bit more. No, maybe not so much. But I kind of want to have it like the underside down here. There's like teeth of energy. You know what? I like that conceptually, but I think that that's a detail that would work better in a standalone image of that character. I think just the eyes is enough. Trying to put teeth in there is making this a little bit too detailed, a little bit too crammed, considering it's something that I've got multiple characters in this image. HJ says that sounds awesome in terms of the premise for the book. Thank you. I mean, that's every time I draw it, I'm hoping that's the reaction people are going to have. I don't want to go with the idea people that, oh, that's what you're doing. So, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, the real thing comes down to the fact that each time I've made a comic, I've learned a lot, and it's made the next project better, but it's also made the next project harder because I'm constantly pushing my growth and my artistic ability, trying to come up with something that tops what I did before, just takes what I learned and grow. And growth is challenging. I'm going to give this guy just one eye. Which I noticed I did that down here too, in this tiny little sketch. That I've got the head all blacked out, but I just drew one eye instead of both. I don't know what's up with that, why I think it's cool, but I do. It's just one of those weird things where I'm like, oh, I don't know why I think it's cool. Anyway, trying to figure out who to put in next. Let's say Famine. I can do up here in the sky because Famine is a flying creature. And I've basically gone between designing as a skeletal old woman, a giant locust, and now what I've been trying to do is sort of merge the locust. And that's what was in this page before. Like if I jump back and show you, when I opened this file, what I had were the initial sketches I did of me trying to design the look and face of this locust creature. I even put a note down here, face like a demon Jiminy Cricket. So it's kind of designing the locust creature. And while I think that this is a scary looking creature, it is still just an insect. And in the same way that I'm trying to make that sea monster less human, I actually want to make this insect more human. I feel like that would be very creepy. For reference, what I really should do is go look at some stills from David Cronenberg's The Fly and maybe do some sketches of some of Jeff Goldblum's late transformations right before he really starts to turn into like a subhuman monster. And I'm going to, let's see here. James said that sort of flame on his head adds to the mystery. Thank you. That's a good one. Mystery, I think, is what it is. The fact that it's just a head with just a little detail sticking out. Is it maybe it's smoke? I'm not sure. Either way, it's a nice touch. Thank you. HJ says, what inspired you to pick Pandora's Box? He says, and that locust looks incredible in my nightmares forever now. Well, maybe I shouldn't move it too far away from the insect. Maybe I should stick closer to that. But in terms of the Pandora's box thing, I think Greek mythology, I like stories that have a timeless sense. Like in my previous book, I was doing Lucifer's Fall from Heaven. I mean, my first book was just a basic crime thriller, and I think I might start going back to doing things that are a little bit more, that are contemporary, that are actually set in our time and place. But I like the idea of stories that are kind of like fables and fairy tales. Hang on. I think I'm drawing on the wrong layer. No, I'm drawing on the right layer. Oh, I'm just using a small ass brush. So it's not necessarily that particular myth that that made me want to do it, so much as just the idea of mythology. And usually there's something inside any given story. Like I've even thought about just going through and finding a bunch of old Greek plays and just drawing them as comics for practice in terms of adapting story. But it could also be the fact that I'm drawn to creation myths because Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, very closely related to the creation of universe and the creation of man. So it's still very closely tied to creation myths, and Pandora's box in its way is a creation myth. It's something to answer the question of why do we have pain and suffering in the world. And I guess at the heart of my story is about mankind being forced to confront this pain and suffering, and also about Pandora trying to atone for what she's unleashed on the world. And I am going to do a little sketch on the side here, because as I'm drawing these characters in here, I'm realizing these guys aren't necessarily going to have a huge difference in terms of their size and shape and design. They're going to feel it's going to feel a little bit like you've got one big monster and then all these other creatures around it, and you're not going to get as much interaction between the other ones. And in my head, I just got something, and maybe this is because I just read a book that's related to Justice League International. There's a DC comic called The Human Target, and I just read the Tom King, Greg Smallwood DC Black Label miniseries, and it is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read and one of the most heartbreaking books I've ever read. It is amazing and beautiful. But they touch on Justice League International, which was known for their multi-character covers and group shots. We were just fitting all these characters in, and all of them having their own distinct, unique personalities. And what I am thinking about is the idea of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the monster is 7. And I'm thinking about the idea of, let's see, where do I want to put my horizon? Let's say I put my horizon right around here. Point being is that all of the original Justice League International covers from the Geffen DeMatteis Kevin Nolan era, they all felt like really cool group shots from music albums. And I'm thinking now about how to group this. And see, and this is the interesting thing. Up here, the one that I started with was me thinking about the silhouettes of the individual characters. I've completely changed the dynamic I stopped worrying about whether they are creatures or humanoid or whatever, and just said, let me worry about the composition and try to find a composition that is that tells a sense of story. So now you've got, obviously, just by virtue of this head sticking here, you have a character that's a giant. I've established just by the relationship of the rest of these that you've got a creature there that's a giant. And I'm putting another creature in here that is pretty large in comparison because it's way in the back, but much taller than these other creatures. I'm going to move this one up a little bit. But yeah, by changing the context of the group shot from working out their silhouettes to just a cool composition, this gives me a very different feel. And to be honest, I think I could probably get a lot of mileage out of just going and looking at different group shots of bands. And pulling images out of there, like pulling compositions. And maybe I put Chaos down here in the middle. And I mentioned Chaos as sort of the puppet master of this whole crew. And maybe I want to have them small and distant. But then that those clouds that I was talking about sort of surrounded by those clouds. I'm just trying to find a way to pose this head so it's overlapping the clouds, but in an interesting way. Let's see here. HJ says, I personally like working with and modernizing 40 superheroes and villains. I found it very useful for adaptation skills. You know, I mean, there's a lot of old school characters who are in the public domain. And the fact of the matter is, like, people talk about, my dream would be to draw Batman or Superman or Spider-Man or, you know, any of the old school characters. And, you know, the idea of a nighttime vigilante has been around for ages. And the fact that you can just say, all right, what would be my version of that? And it's not a bat. Maybe it's not even creature related. Maybe you find something completely different to theme it after. See here, Paul, the great artist, comic creator, and animator, Paul Pate says, "Hey Jeremy, bummed I haven't been able to watch in a while. Good to see you." Well, thank you for stopping by. It's good to see you too, man. Always good to see a fellow creator, and well, I mean, we're all creators here. That's the whole point where we're hanging out. But definitely good to see you. Byron says bands and sports lineups are what you'd be wanting. Yeah. I hadn't even thought, because I was thinking so much about the character design in itself that I wasn't really thinking about. I wasn't thinking about composing the shot and building the character designs within that shot. And I think that this actually opens up a whole new aspect of character design for me. And Paul says that's a good idea. Go back to the Doobie Brothers. This is my older brother got one of their albums when I was a kid. I was struck by how many people were in the band. Yeah, just looking at cool, band artwork and band photos give me a lot of cool photography, or a lot of cool compositions to work from. So I sort of lost the thread on the creature that was going to be right here. Like originally I just put a head, there was a person. And I think because, believe it or not, this was the one that I was going to make. The rat creature, what was going to be creepy about it is that it was going to be a giant rat. Let me redo this tiny little figure in the back. These menacing clouds. Well, let me see. Out of these, I'm trying to think how many would actually be creatures that fly. Death, not necessarily. Although the description of death is not death in terms of Thanatos, the Greek actual representation of death. There are these creatures called the Keres, they're called death spirits, and they're basically like harpies that hover over the wounded and the dying, and people who die violent deaths. And they're like the opposite of angels there to free your spirit. They're like creatures that come and feed on your soul and pull you out of your body. But my point is I was thinking between that creature and famine, it occurred to me that as opposed to having a creature standing here on the ground, what I might do is X out one of these over here and have another character that is balancing out the composition floating up here. And I don't know whether I want that to be the death spirit. And I still don't even know whether the death spirit is going to be singular or plural. Because there's a couple of creatures in here. Like, for instance, one of the things I was thinking about for famine is literally to draw it not just as a humanoid insect creature, but to draw it as something that is a hive mind. So it's a creature made up of all these tiny insects, and the insects in themselves are like supernatural monsters. But again, this is the design phase. So I don't know whether I'm going to move this around, and I don't know whether I'm going to keep famine up there or change famine to the death spirit and have the death spirit flying or floating. I may switch them, swap them, not sure. Or if the death spirits are multiple creatures, then it might be something where instead of having one creature here making a third person, this may become a composition of like, 2 to 3 creatures that make up the death spirits, kind of in the same way that the fates have 3 different aspects. There's the 3 fates, but even though they have 3 different aspects, they work as a trinity. And I may design the death spirits in the same way. And this is why it takes me so long to write this damn book, because I'm trying to be super ambitious. I'm really trying to, and that's something, I mean, honestly, it's only really my 3rd series because Morningstar was in 2 volumes. So even though I've put out 3 graphic novels, I've really just done 2 long form stories and a bunch of short stories. It's nuts to be this ambitious, but the older I get, the more I'm like, I want to do something that, okay, this is so arrogant to say. It is so arrogant. I'm admitting it. I'm acknowledging it up front. I want to do a story that elevates the art form of comics. I want to do a comic book that someone reads it and goes like, wow, this is a piece of literature. It's a piece of art, but it is a crafted story that, is on par with any piece of literature that I would read in English class. And that's a really, 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 really high bar, particularly for somebody that, has only really been taking the writing aspect of reading comics seriously over the past few years. I mean, obviously I took it seriously when I wrote my first graphic novel, but that was more of, I had a whole story complete and I just wrote it down. When you're intentionally trying to weave something together and to put complexity and emotional depth into it, and being very serious about any time that it's lacking those things, it's a high bar. It's a high bar, and it's tough, and I might be nuts for trying to do that. But I've also been reading a collection of essays of Gil Kane. Well, not essays, but it's interviews. It's a book called Sparring with Gil Kane. And, I had never read a ton. I still haven't read a ton of Gil Kane's comics, but reading his essays about what the medium can be and should be, or his thoughts about it, he's very much talking in the same aspect I am, where comics can be so much more and deserve so much more respect as an art form. And true, I think it gets respect that it didn't in the 80s and earlier. But even though it does get more respect as an art form, I don't think that it's, I mean, when we think of our masterpieces, our Anna Kareninas, our War and Pieces, we've got Watchmen, we've got Dark Knight, we've got Eisner's Contract with God. I don't think people necessarily not enough people know about Love and Rockets. Not enough people know about Strangers in Paradise. Not enough people know about what am I thinking of? Oh, the David Mazzucchelli comic Asterios Polyp, which I think is a modern masterpiece. Not enough people know about Art Spiegelman's Mouse. You know, there's all these amazing books, and I don't think that the medium necessarily. The fact is that books that are landmark pieces of literature and comics tend to be the exception as opposed to the norm. And you could level the same accusation at television or film, you know, for all of the movies that, you know, people get so excited about Oscar buzz. Every year there's films that people talk about like, oh my God, this is an amazing film and it's award worthy. You know, that people criticize things for being Oscar bait. But I don't think that people, not that people should be trying to do work just to be important, but I don't think that comics are necessarily a place where people think about, oh, what was this year's great literary comic? Even though they have collections of like America's Best, they have like America's Best comics of for each year. They have those collections now, and I think that those are a great thing. But I don't know. Maybe it's a hangover of growing up in the generation where comics weren't getting the respect that they were due. Because I know that a lot of us, people that are comic creators, who were born, you know, who either grew up in the 80s or earlier, we still have a chip on our shoulder about comics not being respected. And I think that was something that Gil Kane talked about too. It was interesting because he talked about the medium not being respected, but also that the medium wasn't necessarily producing work that was worthy of that respect. I think I just want to produce something, even if it doesn't achieve that lofty, arrogant goal. I feel like I have to try in order just to make something that's just merely good. In order to create something that's, in order to create a book that I feel like is just, oh, this is decent. It's worth the viewer's time, reader's time. They didn't feel like they wasted their time reading it. In order to hit that mark, I have to aim for masterpiece. Because whatever you aim for, you always fall short. So if you aim to just make something that's good, you'll probably end up with mediocre. And if you just aim to make something that's mediocre, you'll probably make something that sucks. So I'm going into this knowing that it's like throwing myself into the wood chipper. But the main thing is that I try not to, even though I know that the goal is ridiculously unreasonably ambitious, to be forgiving to myself in that I may fail. See, Paul says, yes, be arrogant, dream big, go for it. And by the way, guys, we're past an hour here, so I'm going to just catch up on these last couple of comments, and then we're going to wrap it up. So if you had anything else you wanted to throw in before we call it a day, now's the time to hit it up in the chat. And don't forget, I never say this during the stream. I always wait till the very end. Hit the like button, hit the share button. If you're a new viewer, hit the subscribe button. I should be telling you guys this in the middle of the live stream. You're just like, why wait till the very end? Anyway, Byron says, I think it's a good goal to have, personally. We all need something to strive towards. Holding yourself back will only have you thinking, what if? And HJ says, go for it. Great to have a goal. Thank you, guys. I appreciate all the encouragement. Byron says, I might ruffle a few feathers by saying this, but I think the American comic scene is still lagging behind manga in terms of actual definitive masterworks. Vagabond, Berserk, Akira, Ghost in the Shell. James says, yes, some things get overlooked. And Byron says, I can go on and on, but for the American scene, I feel as though we haven't had a really great masterpiece in several decades. Well, I don't think it's so much ruffling feathers, so much as I can cite books like every few years there's a book that comes out that I think is a masterpiece. And if I bet you, like, I don't want to turn into a competition. My point is that I don't feel like the books that are the masterpieces get the recognition they should. I will agree that manga takes the medium seriously as it's a storytelling media, and they tell dramatic stories, and they tell comedic stories, and they tell science fiction stories, they tell horror stories, and the level of genre, the level of literary quality, all of that is present in all kinds of degrees. Whereas with comics, yes, you do tend to get a couple of bright shining luminaries and then just a lot of the same old superhero stories. But for instance, I had mentioned when I was talking about books, I mentioned Asterios Polyp, which isn't recent. I want to say it's at least 5 years old, maybe older. But David Mazzucchelli, the artist on Batman Year One, he put out this book where, I mean, for the most part, he's a comics illustration teacher in New York. That's what he does now. He just teaches. But I guess he's been slowly working away at this comic in his spare time. And he put out this book about an architect who is kind of a dick, and his marriage is falling apart. He's having a midlife crisis, and it is a masterpiece by any standard of comic storytelling. I would say it's a masterpiece. And I would also look at, like I said, I just finished The Human Target by Tom King and Greg Smallwood, and the book is so beautiful it hurts me to look at it. Like, it's drawn like 50s illustration, but every single page is that style. Like, it looks kind of like a mashup of Albert Dorn and Bob Peak. Like, if Bob Peak wasn't as scribbly, if it was like cleaner line, like, there's probably I don't know enough 50s illustrators to be able to cite all of the people that really, that it draws from. And by the way, if you do a Google for Greg Smallwood Human Target on Twitter, he did a Twitter post or a multi-post list of the influences that influenced the style for the Human Target. So he breaks down his own influences, and a lot of them are more contemporary, guys like Kyle Baker. But it's a wide variety of artists that I still need to go back and look at that list, because there's other people that not just, he looks at people that are comic creators, but he also lists different illustrators. My point being is that, yeah, I do think that there are masterpieces and they just don't get the love in American comics. But that said, so it's one of those things where I think that you have a point, but I think that the point is that manga, I think, is better at representing its higher quality masterpieces, whereas American comics, we're so focused on the next big superhero crossover and the next big event that we don't necessarily celebrate the non-superhero masterpieces. And when a book comes out that is a superhero book and is still a masterpiece, which is what I feel like The Human Target is, I think that really, like, they should just give all the Eisners to that book right now. That book is amazing. Let's see here. HJ says there's plenty of masterpieces in comics, but I think they're publicized. Well, okay, that's what I was just saying. So I went on this whole rant. HJ covered it right here. I should just kept reading the comments. He says there's plenty of masterpieces in comics, but I think they're publicized less. One that I think will be a recent classic in the superhero genre is the 2024 Hickman's Ultimate Spider-Man #1. Is fantastic. I definitely need to check that out. James says Oni Press's creators are no slouch. Paul says, I just saw Keith Knight live this weekend. His presentation was great. A couple of his points were comics can change the world. The really good art, you really kind of have to dig around for it. Keith's work is amazing. And I really loved that show that they did based on his comic, that show that was on Hulu called Woke. And it is definitely about the conflict between creative spirit and just wanting to be creative versus being put in a position where you're supposed to, where people look to you to have a voice and speak on issues and do things that are important. And you're like, I just want to draw shit that makes me laugh. it's a very interesting and provocative series. It's fun without being preachy, and it pokes fun at the concept of being woke. So if I don't think it's a show that people that are anti-woke would look at this and just be like, oh, this is garbage. I think that there's things that they would find amusing and make fun of as well. I think it is a show that is aimed at a broad audience. Let's see here. Byron says, I think we need to stop focusing so much on superheroes. Manga has every genre under the sun, from superheroes to sci-fi to mystery to sports. I definitely agree with you on that. Everyone, well, again, this time I'm going to learn from my lessons. I'm going to just read what HJ says. I agree, Byron. There's so much more to comics than superheroes. I personally think that when the lines between genres are fused and blurred, comics are at its best. That's a great sentiment. I will wholeheartedly co-sign on that as well. And I think that I think the problem is also we don't necessarily, when books are outside of comics, when they get developed, when films are made from things that are based on comics, they don't necessarily call out the fact that this came from a comic book, like Road to Perdition. I don't think a lot of people knew that it was a comic book. It's the other one that I'm thinking of, the Dan Clowes, not 8 Ball, because I know it was the one they did before Art School Confidential, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was a really nice slice of life comic. But yeah, there's a lot of things that get developed in other media, in film and TV, that come from comics. They don't necessarily say, hey, people, these are great stories that were told, here first. I mean, and it's also a shame things like Jeff Smith's Bone, which in my mind is like a modern day Lord of the Rings. The fact that they've tried multiple times for years to get it developed either as a film or as a TV series, and those deals just keep falling apart. It's such a great book. I don't know why it is so hard to get this thing made as a film or a TV. I think the longer the series, the better it should be. And Bone, you want to talk about modern masterpieces? Yeah, I know Bone has been done for a long time. But yes, definitely modern masterpiece. Hell, From Hell, Alan Moore. I mean, again, we're leaning on Alan Moore real heavy, from Watchmen to all of the other stuff that he's done. From Watchmen to Swamp Thing to From Hell, we lean heavily on Alan Moore for our comic book genius stuff. But I mean, hey, he wrote a lot of cool stuff. From Hell, another one that from a comic. Well, I don't think that's necessarily the greatest example because I think the film was just okay. I don't think it was great. Definitely didn't capture the magic of the book, but that's all neither here nor there. What I was going to say about Jeff Smith's Bone is I definitely think that would be better as a TV series than as a film, only in that we try to cram so much into these superhero or we try to cram so much into these film adaptations of stories when really what I think comics does best is they give you time over multiple issues to get to know these characters and live and grow with them. And I think that really helps. That helps people attach to the characters, attach to the narrative and the story. And Byron says, yeah, I think the main crux is our culture is still very anti-comic in many ways, even as such, even when good releases aren't lauded. And in fact, you can make a very good argument. People are embarrassed when something has comic roots, as though it was a mark of shame. Yeah. Although I do think we're seeing a major cultural shift in the next decade or two, more kids have access to comics than ever before, and there are more artists now than ever. And HJ says, it's crazy to me that some people don't know movies like The Crow and From Hell are adapted from comics. See, and The Crow is one of my top 3 all-time comics. And the thing that the films have been missing is the love story. Because to me, what made the book work, it's not that it was cool and dark and gritty and violent. It was that in the book, you are constantly go back and forth between the love story of this couple, this really promising couple that has this tragic thing happen to them, this tragically horrible act of violence, visited upon them. It goes back and forth between the story of their relationship and their love and the bloody, violent vengeance that the man, the man is visiting upon the people who destroyed his life, who killed the woman he loved. It's horrible. But the what made the book work is that you fall in love with these characters, with the couple, and you just know how promising. Like, you see how much in love they are, and the fact that you go back and forth, like you're getting splashed from hot water to cold water, just going back and forth between these two, and that love story is what made the violence justified. And I feel like that's been missing from every adaptation of Crow, even the Brandon Lee one, which I think is still the best adaptation. But the violence, I'm not a fan of violence just for the sake of violence. But when you justify violence in a story, it becomes incredibly powerful. And the idea of having such a beautiful life destroyed in such a horrific way justifies the acts of violence that the Crow commits in the name of vengeance. And to me, that's, I hope that gets conveyed in some adaptation of it someday. And HJ says, The Crow is one of my top 3 movies and top 3 comics. Hoping the 2024 movie is good. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even sure. I know that Jason Momoa was attached to it for a long time. I don't even know who's playing the character now, but I hope that it is good. I haven't heard any news one way or the other. I don't know when the release date is going to be, but I do look forward to it. All right, guys, we got to wrap up. Otherwise, honestly, I would love just sitting here talking to you guys all day about comics and art and storytelling. But hey, it's the reason for us to come back next week and do it all again. Depending on what I have time to work on, we may pick up right where I am with these character designs and doing this composition, because lately I've not had time to do much drawing during the week. So we may pick up exactly right here from where we are. And that is some great news. HJ says it's Bill Skarsgård now, and it's all been filmed. Dude, I loved him in It. I loved him, honestly, in Barbarian. I thought he was really good in Barbarian too. I think that he'd be a really good Eric Draven. So looking forward to that. Okay, Paul says, see you next week. And on that note, Paul, we'll see you next week. Thank you. Wow. Okay, I jumped out of the live stream all of a sudden. Hang on. There we go. Wait. I don't want to remove. Where am I? What happened? Hang on. All right. I have no idea if you guys can still hear me or not. Because I accidentally removed myself from the stream. Oh, all right, guys. Let's just wrap it up, because I don't know if I can say my normal live stream ending, because I can't see or hear. I'm deaf, dumb, and blind. All right, guys, that's it for now. Go be creative.